The slums of Midgar, arguably one of the most memorable early moments in Final Fantasy VII, it immediately established how rough the life of its residents were, only further vilifying Shinra who'd practically turned a blind eye to their plights. And nothing would be more representative of this than Wall Market, a red light district home to a crime syndicate run by Don Corneo. It was a wacky little side plot that served to develop characters a good bit, all the while putting them in interesting situations. The only question is, with Final Fantasy VII being remade, would the remake do justice to this incredible segment? Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and today I want to talk about one of my favorite moments from both the original 7 and the remake. Starting with the original Final Fantasy VII's Wall Market, pretty much from the get-go, the place is set up to be just about as seedy as you can get, littered with rubble like the rest of the slums, and thugs casually walking around the area. That is, except for the very end of the map, where Don Corneo's mansion is. A massive gaudy building that sticks out from the rest of the area, showing how wildly different the Don's wealth is compared to the rest of Wall Market's residents, and most of the slums for that matter. Though moving past him, the rest of Wall Market was for the most part what you'd expect from a place like it, containing 2 restaurants, a clothing store, a gym, and what you'd expect from any Final Fantasy locale, like an item, materia, and weapon shop. But at least when it came to the weapon shop, it was a bit bizarre considering there was a full-on tank inside. And speaking of bizarre, the rest of Wall Market definitely stood out from what you'd expect to find in a Final Fantasy town, mainly with the broken automated item shop that tries to shoot you whenever you use it, and the part that's been ingrained in every fan's mind since playing 7, the Honeybee Inn, a parody of Japanese love hotels and soap lands, the latter being a legal workaround for brothels. So in the game's story, when Tifa gets taken away to Wall Market in order to meet the Dawn, Aerith and Cloud soon realize that what with only women being allowed inside his mansion, the only solution was for Cloud to dress up as a woman. And while that entire sequence was pretty crazy on its own, it was the scavenger hunt for his getup that really be memorable, for various reasons. Plus, just from a gameplay standpoint, it was pretty unique, since depending on how well you succeeded at the scavenger hunt, there was a chance you could get an extra scene at the end of the segment with the Dawn. But let's get back on track. For the most part, the scavenger hunt was pretty straightforward, with each different building leading to a different piece, whether it be Aerith convincing the drunk dressmaker to make Cloud a dress, to getting a tiara in exchange for buying an enhancement drink from the inn's vending machine for the materia shop's owner who didn't want to get it himself. However, those would be the most normal, as going down the list, then there's the cologne, which you get depending on what type of medicine you pick for the man vomiting in the restaurant's bathroom. And then there's the gym, where in order to get Cloud a wig, you have to compete in a squat off of all things. But at the end of the day, it'd still be the Honeybee Inn that brought the most out there stuff to the table. So let's just take things from the top here, since this area has a lot to unpack. Once you get inside the establishment, after a guy gives you his pass, there's 2 rooms you can choose, with 2 more that are occupied and another being a dressing room. It's worth noting that if you go to the occupied ones, you can peek inside to see what's going on, leading to 2 wildly different scenes. Though that is not what we're here for. When it comes to the rooms you can choose, you have an option between the group room and the censored room. If you choose the censored room, it leads to a scene with Cloud and his subconscious, ending with him being woken up by a certain individual. But if you choose the group room, well, you get just that, I guess. And no, I don't want to join your young bubbies club. I swear, if there's a scene that represents the bizarre side of 7's humor, it'd absolutely be this one. I mean, hell, what other Final Fantasy had you getting into a small hot tub with 8 muscular men? Not any I can remember. And thus, once you finish up Honeybee Inn by getting makeup done in the dressing room, it's time for the big moment. Putting together each part you painstakingly gathered, Cloud finally cross-dresses, provoking a good number of interesting interactions throughout all of Wall Market. But nothing would come close to what you'd get in the Don's mansion, as after meeting up with Tifa in his weird torture dungeon, Don Corneo makes his long-awaited selection. If you didn't do everything right, he picks Aerith or Tifa, giving you and the other party member not selected over to his lackeys. In that route, after a slightly unsettling scene, you then have to fight them all and make your way back to the Don's room. Though if Cloud is the one selected, it leads to a pretty incredible incredible scene with some amazing dialogue options. And even after that, for real, you can tell the writers were having so much fun writing some of these lines. So then, once Cloud and friends finish interrogating the Dawn, he tricks them with a trapdoor, sending them down to the sewers and promptly ending the Wall Market segment. Even though all in all, the original Wall Market only lasted around 30 minutes, it was a roller coaster of vomit, squats, and bubbies that cement Final Fantasy VII's type of humor for the rest of the game. So now, with the first couple of hours in 7 that encompass Midgar being remade into a full-length game, how would Wall Market fare? Well, like most things in the game, Wall Market was not only seriously expanded on, it also be pretty heavily redesigned, the remake putting far more emphasis on the locale's entertainment side. So as there's just a mountain of stuff to unpack here, let's start from when you first arrive. Initially, things play out pretty much just like they did in the original, however, once you actually get to Wall Market, things are wildly different, with the entire place being far flashier than in the original. Though here's the thing, like I said before, while the original Wall Market segment was 30 minutes long, the remake turned it into a roughly 4-hour segment, and in doing this, the plot progression within the area would be heavily altered. With no other context, that sounds pretty worrying, right? Well, thankfully, Wall Market's changes, at least in my opinion, were absolutely for the better. Since whereas in the original, Wall Market was memorable due to how crazy the situations Cloud was finding himself in were, in the remake, they honestly accentuate that, adding in both new characters and segments, all of which I doubt will leave my mind anytime soon. But speaking of the characters, let's touch on those additions. For one, now instead of just being able to see the Dawn after Cloud cross-dresses, Cloud and Aerith need to seek the approval of Corneo's 3 top underlings who manage different parts of Wall Market: Chocobo Sam, Madam M, and Andrea Rhodea. In fact, you meet Chocobo Sam practically from the get-go, as he's always at the entrance of Wall Market. And with the addition of those 3, Wall Market would no longer be a simple scavenger hunt, the story within the area now revolving around these new characters, all the while somehow maintaining almost all the content in the original. But how is that possible? Well, with the scavenger hunt being no more, now those little side quests to obtain different parts of the dress were turned into actual side quests, with Johnny, a minor character you saw from time to time in the original, being far more fleshed out and involved in this segment. Hell, I'll admit, at first he was honestly more of a nuisance than anything, but over time he slowly began to grow on me as he spectacularly failed at just about everything. Thinking back, if I were to pinpoint any change I didn't initially like, the only thing I can really think of is how the original theme for Wall Market was delegated to a portion of the Collapse Expressway, being replaced by an entirely new song. But even then, it makes perfect sense why they do it, and what with the remade Wall Market having a much different atmosphere than the original, the Oppressed wouldn't fit the area anymore like it used to. I'm just glad it was in the game to begin with, rather than being completely shafted. Though good news, even though the choice-based scavenger hunt was replaced, this new take on it still maintained a lot of choice, with choices you make in both side quests and main story in the area determining later outcomes like which side quests are available and the dress Cloud ends up with. In fact, even before this segment, the game's giving you choices that'll affect Wall Market, like Cloud choosing what kind of dress Tifa will have and the Sector 5 side quest determining Aerith's dress. It's something they didn't have to do at all, but I'm so glad they did. Anyways, before I actually lose myself in gushing about this area, let's get this video back on the rails. After meeting Chocobo Sam and finding out that Tifa's been chosen as a candidate to be Don Corneo's wife, you're free to roam about the area. And on the previous note about the music, can I just say that the Honey Bee Inn theme that plays when you're in that section of Wall Market has no right to go that hard. Like, I streamed the remake on my original playthrough, but when I was getting footage, I kind of found myself sitting there for a while listening to this song on loop. It's so good, man. Not to mention, while it is true that on the surface, Wall Market isn't as outwardly seedy as the original, that's pretty much made up for once you get into the thick of it, with the place having multiple back alleys containing everything from vomiting drunks to suspicious characters. It's honestly crazy how much stuff they fit into Wall Market, like just take the voice acting. In general, down to even the most minor characters, the 7 remake is a fully voiced game, and Wall Market is no exception, packing in so much dialogue, the game can barely handle it sometimes. So once you've thoroughly taken the place in, been almost shot by the item shop again, and gotten some quality Johnny dialogue, it's time to get the approval of the trio, starting with Chocobo Sam, who in stereotypical fashion decides his segment with a rigged coin toss. The interesting part here is while you're guaranteed to lose, the choices you make in the coin toss are one of the determinants on what you'll get in Wall Market going forward, the other determinant being which massage you pick with Madam M directly after. And oh boy, the Madam M segment. It was at this point of the game where you could have told me this was from Yakuza and I wouldn't have thought otherwise. Like, the medium price massage is pretty tame, but wow, the cheap and expensive ones are two entirely different kinds of nightmares. Don't get me wrong though, it was still pretty hilarious. However, what would actually take me by surprise was the other notable addition to Wall Market, the Corneo Coliseum, an underground fighting ring run by, you guessed it, the Don himself. So after winning over Madam M, in order to pay for Aerith's dress, they were sent to the Coliseum to win the Corneo Cup. And let me just say, fitting in with the rest of Wall Market near perfectly, the dialogue in this segment was out of this world, mimicking the typical over-the-top announcers you'd see in these kinds of events. One of my personal favorite things about this segment being how with each win, you slowly begin to win over everyone in the Coliseum, becoming the main star in no time flat. Also, it was a nice touch being able to go into the other waiting room to talk to the people last defeated. Rest in peace, Johnny, rest in peace. But by far, the thing that made me literally jump up in excitement was the final match of the cup, where you have to fight none other than the most infamous enemy in the original's Midgar, the Hell House. For those who don't know, in the original's collapsed expressway, the Hell House was just another random encounter, albeit the most bizarre one. I mean, when you're expecting a little whatever enemy, what's more menacing than a stationary house? Of course, now, with the Hell House being transformed into a full-on boss, Square Enix knew what they were doing, creating a fight that was both parts hilarious and utterly terrifying. I know I've talked about the dialogue a lot, but the stuff they wrote for this segment was on an entirely different level. Hell, they wrote so much that even things like different limit breaks and summons each got unique commentary. If I had to describe this fight in a short, concise way, I'd call it the most terrifying pun ever, because once the house transforms into its true form, the fight becomes a constant barrage of nonsense, the thing even being able to fly and becoming untouchable with God House mode. Seriously, whoever came up with this crap deserves an award. Anyways though, 1,000 house puns later, the Hell House is finally defeated, earning Aerith her dress and catching the eye of a certain fabulous someone. But before we get to him, at this point it's side quest time, where like I said before, here's where your previous choices start to take effect. If you picked the side of the coin and chose the worst massage, you'll get 2 of 4 available side quests. However, if you let Aerith pick a side and chose the best massage, you'll get the other 2 quests. Definitely didn't expect the remake to have this kind of replayability, that's for sure. Now I won't go too in depth with these as we're coming up on the moment, but to touch on my 2 personal favorites, let's start at the gym. As you can't improve on perfection, the squat minigame has returned, this time even harder than the original. Although with the absence of the scavenger hunt, the gym became more of a competition for rewards rather than a squat off for someone's wig. Then after that, there's what was once all the different errands to put together Cloud's outfit combined into a singular massive quest. Now, the sequence turned into a wild goose chase of sorts, with Cloud and Johnny going all around Wall Market searching for the inspiration of the drunk clothes store owner. And let me just say, with this portion finally being realized correctly, what with the original having a really shoddy translation, there were some pretty legendary back and forths. Johnny and Cloud talking about
the sauce! The sauce!
being one of my favorites. Plus, the added detail of materia levels deciding how well you do in certain parts of the quest was a pretty unique idea too. Definitely hope it'll make a return in the next part of the remake. Though those 2 aside, the other quests you can get are decent too, don't get me wrong. It's just that nothing can compare to Johnny yelling about drugs after getting indigestion. But anyways, with the side quests out of the way, you get to reap the rewards of doing everything in Sector 5, if you did, as Aerith quite literally walks up on a red carpet in her new dress. So with that, as Madam M finally gave her seal of approval, the only thing left to do is to make a beeline for the Honey Bee Inn. Alright, let's take this from the top. Going back to the original game for a second, the original Honey Bee Inn was unique for more than just what was inside, as out of all the areas in the game, it had a significant amount of of cut content, with the segments even being fully modeled before being cut. Hell, just as a fun fact, one of those fully modeled rooms were actually reused in the original plate collapse cutscene. So returning to the remake, this segment would prove to be pretty interesting, seeing how certain cut things returned. Well, kinda. You see, out of everything in Wall Market, it'd be the Honeybee Inn that changed the most, the establishment no longer being a brothel and instead becoming more of a unique nightclub. Not to mention, whereas the original building only had a main room with a couple doors leading to others, the remake brought in a lobby, something the original would have had if not for it being cut. Then, in the new and improved main room, pretty much everything was changed too. One of the locked rooms showing someone getting a massage, and the other one, interestingly, showing Palmer chasing a girl around with a net before promptly running out of breath. I didn't know this at the time of playing, but in the aforementioned cut content, Palmer was actually supposed to be at the Honeybee Inn, albeit not in the same way as in the remake. Moving on to the next room, the dressing room was pretty much the same, only having some minor dialogue, as it's not like you need to get makeup done there like before. And after that, there's the other open room, where you have to guess the shape the honey girl is making, all the while Johnny's drunk dad stares blankly. Pretty much par for the course at the Honeybee Inn. However, what exactly do you even do here now? Clearly the hot tub scene was removed from the game along with the other rooms scene because, I mean, this, in modern times? Phew, that wouldn't have gone over well. But even then, how do you top such a horrifyingly memorable scene like this? Is it even possible? Well, I only have one thing to say. Screw it, let's dance. Wow. From being bewildered in the tutorial as Cloud grooved to a remix of the battle theme to the main attraction, I was left in actual shock. Like seriously, right from the get-go when the show starts with that incredible song, I immediately knew I was in for a crazy time. Even now, long after beating the game, I'm still jamming out to this song. And outstanding intro aside, once the dancing started, I was in flat-out disbelief. Not only did they replace the old Honeybee Inn with something better, they did so by a long shot. Rather than feeling like Cloud in the way of wanting to escape as soon as possible, I felt like Aerith cheering him on, something I'm sure I'm not alone in. Like, I know this video has once again devolved into me gushing about the remake, but come on, how can you not when faced with this? I'd kill to get footage of the motion capture actors doing these dances. They absolutely deserve a raise. And thus, once the dancing comes to a close, leaving your hands tired from trying to perfect every button prompt, it's time for the scene. Something I'm confident almost everyone knew was coming, having played the original or not. No, not that scene, the other one. There you go. Cloud's transformation. Once again, Square Enix knew exactly what they were doing, because what a spectacle it's become. It's even funnier after the fact, with Cloud rushing out of the Honeybee Inn as quickly as physically possible. Good news for him though, now we're in the home stretch. Only place left to go being the Dawn's Mansion. But we're not gonna do that yet. No, of course not, as just like in the original, when Cloud is cross-dressed, you'll get some amazing dialogue. To name my personal favorite, I'd recommend you interact with Chadley during the segment. It yields some pretty nice rewards. So after being catcalled all the way down Wall Market, it's time to meet Wall Market's most eligible bachelor. Though on a side note, I've been keeping myself from blabbing about the music too much, but wow, the transition when you actually enter the mansion is nuts. While main parts of Wall Market were all altered in some way, thankfully the Dawn segment would be extremely faithful, if anything, just receiving more quality dialogue. Like after Cloud and Aerith get knocked out and put in the weird dungeon with Tifa, her realization that Cloud was Cloud is peak comedy, let me tell you. Plus, one thing I love that the original also did is just how much the mansion sets up the Dawn's character before you even meet him. His enormous ego being clearly shown in how much he flaunts his wealth all over the mansion. The vending machine for his area in the remake being literally modeled after him. And on that note, without further ado, here he is. Out of every character in the remake, Don Corneo is quite possibly the most spot-on adaptation of how he was in the original, the voice actor absolutely killing it in the role. I mean, even the character model itself was perfect. I like to think that during development, multiple months were spent fine-tuning the Don's physics. But it is worth noting, what with the scavenger hunt being replaced, that now Don Corneo's choice is fixed on Cloud, which at least personally didn't really bother me, especially since you get to see what happens to both groups. On Cloud's side, you get to see more of the Don being a grade A rat, and on the girls' side, oh boy. As I showed earlier in the original, the losers portion wasn't exactly much, just being a few consecutive battles, but in the remake, the composers were working overtime, creating a remix of Tifa's theme that slaps so hard, it straight up makes the entire segment memorable as a result. Who would have thought that all 7 was missing was some quality Tekken music? And I mean, who doesn't love Aerith giving a man a concussion with a chair? So then, when the 3 meet up again, thankfully the interrogation scene is basically untouched, aside from the Don's voice actor clearly just having a good time. They even kept the Don's final question before he sent them to the sewers, which I mean is not fair at all in the remake. How are you supposed to answer a timed question when the Don is mesmerizing you with his moves? And with that, Final Fantasy VII Remake's wall market comes to a close, at least until you return to it later in the story. Now, when comparing the original wall market with its remade counterpart, at least for me, there's a pretty clear winner. Don't get me wrong, I'll say right now that the original will always have certain charm and a couple other things the remake can't have, but compared to the amount of painstaking detail and love that was packed into the new wall market, I have to pick it every time. Like seriously, I didn't even mention this stuff before, but even the avalanche wall that you climb up in the original is here. Granted, you don't climb up it anymore with certain story beats changing, but they still included it regardless. Plus beyond that, other things like the big restaurant having a guy singing a song with full vocals, and all the establishments peppered into the area, it's all stuff they didn't have to do. So in the end, whether you prefer one or the other, I think it's safe to say that we're all grateful for the spectacular job the devs did with both the original wall market and the remake's wall market. Wow, well that turned out to be a much longer video than I intended it to be. Let me know whether you like this one or not, as it's something I've never really tried before. Believe me, if you guys like this, I have so many more things I can gush about, so do let me know. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, do subscribe, and today's cool thing of the day is Tim Rogers' slow translation of Final Fantasy VII. Honestly, I'm pretty surprised not many people know about this series. It's one of the most interesting things I've seen on YouTube in a while. Hell, it even influenced this video somewhat, as with how shoddy the original 7's translation was, Wall Market's dialogue wasn't always the clearest, many things being lost entirely. Basically, go check that series out if you want to learn more about that kind of stuff. And hey, if you want to see me go through the remake, I streamed it all on Twitch, with me at the moment streaming a randomized Nuzlocke of Pokemon Platinum. Do stop by if that strikes your fancy. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.